And then Plato said, philosophy is a rehearsal for dying. It hit me like zap. I can still feel, I felt it all my life. And he's absolutely right. Philosophy is a rehearsal for dying.
Hi, I'm Brilliant, your host for this show. I know that I'm incredibly blessed. As the son of self-made billionaires, I've seen the high price some people pay for success. And I've learned that money really can't buy happiness. But I've also had the good fortune to learn directly from many of the world's leading teachers. If you're ready to be, do, have, and give more, this podcast is for you.
How often do you think about what happens after we die? Have you ever known anyone who has died and come back? Maybe you have. It's actually not all that uncommon. My guest today has made a career of studying this phenomenon. His name is Raymond Moody. He's got a Ph.D. He's also a medical doctor. He's a world-renowned scholar, lecturer, and researcher, and he's widely recognized as the leading authority on near-death experiences, as he coined the term NDE, or near-death experience. He's the best-selling author of many books, including Life After Life, Glimpses of Eternity, The Light Beyond, Coming Back, and more. His work profoundly illuminates our understanding of death, dying, and grief, and offers compelling answers to the question, is there an afterlife? I read 2 of Dr. Moody's books. I read Paranormal, My Life in Pursuit of the Afterlife, and what I believe is his latest book called God is Bigger Than the Bible. I really appreciate Dr. Moody's wide-ranging curiosity. And I also appreciate the honesty and the intellectual rigor with which he pursues this question of an afterlife. In this conversation, we explore so much. We talk about philosophy, we talk about nonsense, we talk about commonly reported experiences of those who have died and returned to life, or at least those who reported having an experience along those lines. Dr. Moody is a skeptic, as he says. He draws no particular conclusion, although he does have his own experiences, including his own near-death experience, which we also talk about. This conversation is one of those where I pursue my curiosity in full intensity. So if you are a seeker, if you're curious, if you want to more fully understand the universe or life, you might enjoy this. With that, this 2-hour conversation with my friend and kindred spirit, I think, fellow seeker, lover of knowledge, philosopher, Dr. Moody, or as he says, Raymond. You can also find him online at lifeafterlife.com, or of course, with a Google search, or find his books on amazon.com or at any fine bookseller near you. Okay, with that, enjoy this conversation with my friend, Dr. Raymond Moody. Well, Raymond, welcome to the School for Good Living.
Just a pleasure and delight to be here with you, Brilliant. We had a little conversation here, and you're just such a really nice person to be with.
What a privilege. Well, will you tell me, please, what is life about? And I want to follow that question because I know your life study has been around death. And so I want to follow it up as well as, what is death about?
I grew up with old people. It was a complicated story, but I identified more with my grandparents, my Waddleton grandparents. My dad was in the war. It was then medical school. And so death was just sort of part of the picture because old people were always dying. And my grandmother, Moody, was more talked about funerals all the time. So, that was the background to me. I was into astronomy and mind expansion. And Dr. Seuss and Lewis Carroll, that has filled my childhood. I remember sitting out on the porch reading Dr. Seuss in a rocking chair when I was a kid. And because I realized that nonsense literature portrays the world in a very real way. It's much better than literal language. So then I went to the University of Virginia intent on becoming an astronomer wanted to take a class in philosophy too. So, all right, Raymond, read Plato's Republic, first assignment. And then Plato said, philosophy is a rehearsal for dying. It hit me like zap. I can still feel, I felt it all my life. And he's absolutely right. Philosophy is a rehearsal for dying.
What does he mean by that?
Well, he means several things. And one is that this question of life after death is the one that everything else turns on, right? That if there is a life after death, then this whole existence we're in now takes on a wholly different context and meaning. See, it's just like the radical nature of this, is there or isn't there, that everything else turns on that concerns us. So that was what hit me about it. And then about 3 years later, I heard from one of my philosophy professors that a wonderful man right there in Charlottesville, Dr. George Ritchie, had one of these experiences. And so I took the opportunity. George was always so generous to students and all these lectures, and I just listened to, wow, zap, just holy man. So that was kind of a big, that was where I guess God came into my life consciously, more or less.
Yeah, that's something I definitely want to ask you about. And thank you for providing that background. I want to go back and touch on a few things that you said. One is, I'm curious what your view is on why did philosophy have such a hold on you when you had gone to school thinking that you would study astronomy and the physical universe, but then when you encountered this work and Plato and Socrates, why was it something that just grabbed a hold of you and you dove into with both feet?
When I came across this word philosophy, and I said to Dad, what is philosophy? And he went immediately into this. It is like this wonderful thing that is done by these very wise men. It was all just like, and, just a very, very, praising, just like judgment of the field of philosophy and how wonderful it was. And that was one element of it. And even in high school, I'd been interested in philosophy. I'd read some philosophy things too, although the astronomy was that main. And really paradoxically too, the philosophical sweep of astronomy was what brought me to it in the first place, right? 7 years old, built my own telescope. I gotta laugh now, but it worked. And looking out into that, expanse, and having the thought that many people, probably everybody listening to this is going to say, yeah, me too. You have this thought when you're about that age, how big is this thing?
Yeah.
And so your mind zooms out to the wall, but then you say, hey, just a minute, it's got to be something on the other side of a wall, doesn't there? But then the other thing is it goes on forever, and that's mind-boggling. And I remember that experience was really part of it was concurrent with my waking up to the amazement of consciousness in the first place, and the realization that you're never going to go have any much knowledge at all, but that it's fun to, it's the greatest pleasure, to seek knowledge. Along making the creative along with that.
I certainly think so. Right. And we're reminded of that even in the etymology of the word philosophy, right?
Yeah.
A lover of wisdom.
Yeah. And so concurrently with that too, I realized, it wasn't a bad thing to me to realize it was nonsense, because I went right to Dr. Seuss and Lewis Carroll and and comic books, Uncle Scrooge comic books and Donald Duck comic books by a great Disney artist whose name was Carl Barks, and of whom Lucas and Spielberg have said that he's a national treasure, and that, all these amazing books that just changed so many people my age. You might take a look at him. It's really mind-bending.
Carl Barks. That's fun. Well, thank you for that. So from there, earning a PhD in philosophy and another PhD and then an MD.
Actually, that thing, somehow I saw that thing about a PhD in psychology, and that, I don't know how that got misprinted or something, but actually, what should have been is like I was a professor of psychology.
Okay.
In other words, I had a PhD in philosophy, and I have been and an MD and a psychiatry residency, and I have also served as a professor of psychology.
Okay, got it. So from there, this journey of learning and growth, looking, which I think is so remarkable, and probably, as you said, there's developmental stages, and it's like a path that we're all on, perhaps, that we often begin by looking outside, but inevitably, it seems, we come to look inside.
Yeah.
Right. And this work that you've done particularly as a doctor, I realize these are not separate necessarily, these roles you play or the hats you wear, so to speak. But in this work of talking with people who have had death experiences, near-death experiences, crossed over, gone to the afterlife, perhaps, which, by the way, I do want to interject this. Just about a month ago, I was reading something online and I heard the joke, why did the chicken cross the road? Right? I had never, ever got in my 40 plus years of living the double meaning of to get to the other side.
Oh, yeah.
That was like
I have never thought of that either. Brilliant. That's brilliant. I mean, holy mackerel. I never thought of it either.
Yeah. Isn't that interesting?
That's right. That it goes from just a triviality to a spiritual statement. Oh, my God. Brilliant.
Isn't that interesting? So I have a few questions. And by the way, one of these comes from my mother, because I talked to her yesterday about the fact that you and I would be talking today. And she had a question that she wanted me to ask you. So I'll get to that. But I do want to ask, you talked about God just a few minutes ago. And as I understood, that was in relation to people who have, I'm not sure what you call it, crossed over, passed on, something, gone to the afterlife. But I do, so we can go in a lot of different directions, but I'd love to ask you about what are some of the commonalities, right? Because not everyone has the same experience, but there are similarities, right? And so and then as you mentioned that you had your own experience, which is one thing to research, but it's another to experience firsthand. So I'd love maybe if you could start in the macro. Well, let's start with the personal. Will you tell me about your experience? I understand you've had, is it a thyroid issue?
Yeah, just like I had retrospectively, when I was diagnosed with myxedema in May of 1985, and they could find no measurable thyroid hormones in my body. And my TSH, which gets high when your thyroid is low, was by far the highest that any of my doctors had ever seen. And they had traced this back retrospectively in my medical record to 1966. And, but it wasn't caught at that time. It's retrospectively, the symptom that was missed was a single white eyelash.
Wow.
Which I learned in my medical training is a sign of Hashimoto's thyroiditis. And I had it and I noticed it and I asked them, they just, so nothing, it's just thought it, dismissed it as idiosyncratic. And then I haven't had this. And see, nobody could believe that I was having a thyroid problem because my output was very high. I mean, I was, so it didn't make sense that I could be having all these degrees and all these, doing all these things and having a thyroid problem. So, And so, yeah, and it got so bad. I mean, I went into the great darkness. I mean, I was just a lot of period I don't remember of that, which is the part of the thyroid condition that when you get into that myxedematous state, it's a kind of organic, like dementia, I guess, really. And so coming out of it was just like the most amazing thing. I began to see colors, the vibrancy of colors. I mean, it's indescribable, just like this reemergence. And during that time, attempted to kill myself, I guess. I mean, it's just I remember the despair, but I don't remember the circumstances very much. So anyway, and so then during that time, not like a full-blown near-death experiences, the out-of-body and all like that. No, mine was different. I like to say that it was more like I saw the city limit sign. Mm. But what I very definitely experienced was the layering of reality, which is these things that people say that it's like George Ritchie said that he was in the presence of Christ. He said he was sort of shown 3 different realms of life after death. And one realm where these people were just stumbling around, trying to just like focused on who were dead but didn't know it. But, there's humor to it too. It's because, it's like, wake up, it's like when your wife is waking up in the morning, she's kind of, you got to say, hey, wake up.
That sounds a little bit like Earth.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. And then he said, George said, by the way, he said, this was early 60s, and he would say, and Christ, he said, well, another wave of his arm of light, he says. He said the whole scene changed, and he saw into a whole different dimension of reality, which was, he said, the best way, he said, if you try to put Caltech and MIT and Harvard and Yale and Princeton and, University of California and UVA, just all of them squeezed into one, he said, you can't even begin to imagine this. He said, but it was people whose avocation who just seemed they're into seeking knowledge. And he said he sort of saw into one aspect of that place that he said you could call it, it's like you'd have to say it was like a library. And he said, in one section of this library consisted of the holy books of the universe. Now, I would say that, but when you think of the religions that might have, acknowledged that kind of domain, it's very interesting, right? And so then another wave of Christ's arm light. And so then he sees around, he didn't go into it. He said you couldn't get out of it once you're in it. It was like, he said it was like cities of light. And that all the people there were, light. And it's like a civilization constructed out of light. And, all of these are things I've heard from numerous people, but all of these, the ones like this are always the ones who are the cardiac arrest went on so long that you just, it's impossible to believe, but, they happen. And George's was one of those. He was, the doctor, Francie said, who was, brought him back to life by injecting adrenaline into his heart, said, I've never seen such an unusual thing in my 40 years of practice in medicine. He said, George Ritchie was dead. He said, for 9 minutes at least. And you were asking about some of the common features.
Yeah, that's right. So first of all, just acknowledging that in your career, when you began, as I understand, and you can correct this or add to it as appropriate, that you didn't know anyone had these afterlife or near-death experiences. Then you learned it was common to the Greeks and other cultures. And then, although it's not something that we talk about publicly often in our society, or we don't know how to discuss, one by one, teaching classes and working with patients, you found this is actually a very common experience.
Yeah. Yeah. And anybody who investigates can find that. It's this was known throughout history. It's in Plato. So you can find it all throughout. But see, back in those days, it was rather uncommon to almost die and recover, But in the 60s and 70s, the development of cardiopulmonary resuscitation, people were being brought back from that state all the time. So that's when I really started investigating it in 1969. I knew 2 cases before, but then when I started being a philosophy professor, I just started hearing this from my students in connection with reading the Phaedo. This is what people come up. It's just like my grandma had this experience, or I. And then my colleagues, the other professors, and all, this happened to me. So then I went to medical school in 72. And that's how it developed. It was what was the commonality of it was so astonishing, because back in those days, the civic clubs were all male provinces, and they were run by the movers and shakers in these little towns. And so I would, this professor over to the university is saying he's talked to people. And so let's invite him over. And so then, always, and then they all invite you, right? Because they got to have a lecture every week. And so these are the people in town who are the prominent people. And it was invariable. Dr. Moody, I've never told anybody this, but, and so that's how it all accumulated. And in medical school, the access, right, where I could go right there and talk to patients in the hospital who had recently been resuscitated. The way it begins, though, most commonly is people say, I heard my doctor say he's dead, or we've lost him. He's gone, or the doctor or nurse or somebody else. But to me, this is a comment I've heard all over the world in multiple different forms, like little slight verbal differences, but it's all. But I have never been so alive as when I heard that doctor say I was dead. Because all of a sudden people say they leave their bodies. It's like you're sitting just thrown back, you're looking at it from a distance, typically above. And people say that they can understand perfectly what the doctors and nurses or other people present are communicating, not through their auditory sense, though. They say they're aware of what these people are thinking. And that from their point of view, at first they're puzzling. How can it be? And here I am up here, I'm looking at me down there, what is this? And they realize that they can't communicate with the doctor or nurse. They say, I tried to say, what is this? And nobody could see me, and nobody could hear me. I tried to touch them to get their attention. I just went right through, didn't make contact. So then at some point, the realization comes, this is what you call death, where then begins a transition into some other kind of realm of consciousness or realm of reality. Which they say words immediately fail, that you just go into this zone that is beyond words, and that nonetheless, its people seem to resort instinctively worldwide to the same frame of expression, even without, saying it, still saying it's beyond words. The way they put it, they say, I became aware of a passageway or a tunnel or tube or hallway. I went through this and I came out on the other side into this incredibly brilliant and warm and loving light. Mm-hmm. And that, people say, I say light, I could just well say love. It doesn't make any difference which way you say it. And there's comfort, peace. People say that they see or in the presence of relatives or friends of theirs who've already died, who appear there to be there in a greeting committee. I just always wondered if they have a little hat with welcome on it. Just kidding on that one. I used to be a comedian, by the way. Forgive me these lapses. But they say that it's not like you see a physical body there. It's like, but it's recognizably your loved one. You can tell by, there is a form, but not material. It's I guess the best way of saying it. And that you know them by the memories and personalities. And then at some point, as people often say, everything else just kind of disappears. And they are surrounded by a holographic panorama, for want of a better term, which it's that, first of all, that time stands still. We are here. There's no time anymore. And that you are surrounded by this panoramic view of every single thing that you have ever done in your life, which you see then from a double perspective, not just from the perspective you had when you were doing the action, but rather from the viewpoint, empathic viewpoint of the other people who were involved with that. That's right. Like you're suddenly in this panorama, you see not just what your side of it is, like how that was received. And all of this is timeless, right? And it's very often in the presence of a being of sheer compassion and light. The Christians tend to say Christ, Jews tend to say God or an angel. Some people just say a light, a being of light. It's like a presence of compassion who sees everything. This is far beyond words, but they say when you're trying to recount it, you have to say it's as though he asked a question, right? Or the being asked, and it was, how have you learned to love? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And various formulations, right? But the focus is on love.
Yeah. Amazing. Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for sharing that and breaking that down. This leads to one of the questions I'm really eager to ask, and it's taken me about an hour to get here. but it's this: in my research of this work of near-death experiences, that people who come back almost universally report three things: a decreased fear of death, an increased appreciation for life, and a greater sense of purpose.
There you go. I would say as they're coming back, they say, whatever they were chasing before. I've been chasing knowledge. Some people chase sex or power or money or fame. But whatever they were chasing, they say that when you come back from this, you realize what this is all about is learning to love. Another thing people say it has related to the purpose is people say that shortly thereafter, I went down to the local university, signed up for a course where it inspires the process and knowledge. It eliminates the fear of death. Not that they would want to die in a painful or unpleasant way. It's just, there's no more fear of death.
Yeah. So
occasionally art. Occasionally people become artists.
Interesting.
Yeah. And successful artists.
And that makes sense, right? If you can't describe an experience in words, but you feel you want to share something, whether it's music or painting or dance or something. But so the question I have is this: if this is such a common report or phenomenon that people come back and they have these, what I would say, these benefits, right? They no longer fear death as they did. They appreciate things so much more, and they have more clarity, and specifically around loving. The question is, can we, or how can we have that same kind of transformation without having to die or cross over?
I just try to ask God to help me with my problems, and I know that I'm not competent. And it's my family, Chris, it's like direct the prayer and take care of the kids, and and me, as I'm 77, I'm tired of Raymond Moody, but take care of me on behalf of them is the way I'm looking at it. And so, in regard to the question you ask, I'm not really good on the big picture on how this could be used. See, in terms of, I understand the social value that could come from it. I do. I mean, to some degree, except that what people are saying, but I don't know how that would translate into it. I just have no idea. But here's one thing I could say. Brilliant, with the greatest confidence, because not me, because I've hammered this out since I was a kid and throughout my career as a philosophy professor and psychiatrist. But I think what is possible, what is really, and I absolutely claim now, with the desire to be refuted in a way. I'm not trying to set out a new ideology here or to pat myself on the back, but rather what I'm saying is that, in my opinion, there is a major, confirmable, verifiable breakthrough in the genuine, rigorous, rational investigation of the question of life after death. And that it is confirmable in the sense that anybody who works through this in their own minds and follows the argument and does the mental exercises that come with it will be able to, in their own minds, to cross over that barrier, psychological and logical barrier, that separates this life from that life. Now, I immediately want to say this is not for New Age believers with a new version of No. This is not something magical that I can wave a wand. This is a sort of course that I worked out beginning in 1969 throughout my teaching career and workshops. And it's like, which is it just got, I just am so grateful and embarrassed in a way about the comments from the many students and all. It's just so nice. But what the end of this is for the question that you and I are discussing right now, is question of life after death, is that in the real world, not the world of parapsychology, these people who are deluded by their pseudoscience, and nice people, this is not a personal, these are dear friends of mine, and they know my point of view, all right? But it's just it's an incoherent statement to say that in 2022, that science could contribute to the question of life after death. That's just ridiculous to anybody who really wants to think it through rather than just want it to be as they think it is, want it to be. But those things aside, all of that kind of, and this is addressed even also, especially to the so-called skeptical community, who are not skeptics, but who are, they say, oh, this is, and so those are good people too. Right? A little caustic and satirical, but nonetheless, but nice. These are my dear friend, Paul Kurtz. I loved Paul. He was the founder of these psychops, or, the skeptics, as they incorrectly call themselves. They're humanists, is what they are. And they don't even know who Pyrrho was. And you can't be a skeptic unless you know who Pyrrho was. But anyway,
Raymond, just a few more questions, if I may. And the one that my mom wanted me to ask, she was insistent, was about judgment after death, right? She said, as I was describing a little bit of the experiences people report, judgment wasn't in there. And she said something like, oh, there's got to be judgment. But will you talk about whether or not there's judgment or what your take or understanding on that is?
Yes, I do. And judgment, I would say, yes, definitely. Judgment. And that that people take it as judgment, which I can understand that point of view. But in my case, I realized it was education. And how should I put this? In near-death experiences, people say, I remember George Ritchie, who was raised in a sort of strict fundamentalist thing. And then he said there he was at 20 years old, surrounded by all these, among other things, sexual indiscretions. Right. And he said, and his religious background, that was sure to get you into hell. And so there he wasn't, everything was out in the open, and there he wasn't, presence of Christ. And I remember it was in 1976, I think, George looked at me and my wife. He was sort of reminiscing about this. And he said, there they all were. And he said, and he didn't even mention them. Right. And so it's number one, it's not focused on the things that people had imagined that it might be, like the sexual things or whatever. And I think that there is a conceptual breakdown in trying to, it's normally the missteps in life that people who are like on the TV and programs so focused on everybody else going to hell, that kind of mentality. And it's usually from some doctrinal point. I remember down in the South, there was a vile and hateful division among the Baptists. I swear this, and some believe that you had to baptize them with going upstream and others downstream. And yes, major, hatreds and everything. And so, and it's not that, right? It's not anything about your doctrines. Right. But it's what I hear. But that's what the TV preachers and all try to tell you. Well, then that all goes away. I remember this fundamentalist minister, one of the really tough sects down in Georgia, was raised in it. And he said in his life review, he said, I was surprised to find that God wasn't interested in my theology. He said, it's just, he said, no, it's all about this love thing and so, I mean, it gets very complex, but it is a conceptual gap to me to say that because of some ideological infraction during a period of, several decades of life, that you could be tormented for eternity and endless, and that has nothing to do with justice. The image of justice is the blindfold and the scales.
Yeah.
But to put over here, 30 years of ideological infringement, and over here,
eternal damnation,
a bazillion years of tormentation. That's not justice. That's nonsense. Right. So I'm getting at here, and so this is what I think. Some years ago, I'm sort of making this vague to avoid hurting anyone. Some years back, I did a series of unkind things to a person over a period of time, and I was just unkind. Okay. And then years later, decades later, I find myself in the same situation, only this time I'm the victim. And not only that my tormentor is about 10 times. I mean, that makes sense to say it that way. I mean, really, about 10 times more volume, see. But that's part of the educational process. To turn up the volume, you get it, see.
Yeah.
But it was education. Was I being punished? No. This was not something that altered the fabric of the universe. Was God punishing me? God was educating us how it felt. And all through this, I kept saying, thank you, God. Thank you. I mean, enthusiastically, because you can't, understand what you inflicted on somebody else until you experience it. It's just part of the education. It's a necessity that you've got to see the other side of that.
Yeah, there's no teacher like experience. No doubt.
And God is one of it.
Okay. Well, if you're okay with it, what I'd like to do before we conclude is to transition our conversation. And there's so much more that I'd love to ask, but here we are in this human realm. It seems we are temporally limited. So what I want to do is, with your blessing, to move to the enlightening lightning round, which is a series of 10 questions, but the aim is for them to be relatively quick. Okay. And then the last part, I just want to ask you 2 questions about writing.
Okay.
If that works. You good with that?
I am. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. I am so good with it. Yeah.
Okay. Question. So here we are in the enlightening lightning round. So question number 1, please complete the following sentence with something other than a box of chocolates. Life is like an
educational movie with God as the screenwriter.
Okay. Thank you. Question number 2, what's something that you have changed your mind about, maybe in the last few years?
Well, one specific thing was I used to be sort of dismissive of people who prayed, kneeled when they prayed. And I thought, how vain to act like you're flattering God. But then I had an experience myself with the presence of God and I couldn't stand up. So I've changed my mind about that thing about kneeling, see where it came from.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. Question number 3. If you were required every day for the rest of your life to wear a t-shirt with a slogan on it or a phrase or a saying or a quote or a quip, what would the shirt say?
Keep guiding my life, God. Yeah.
Okay. Question number 4. What book, other than one of your own, have you gifted or recommended most often?
Plato's Phaedo. Yeah, it's the beginning of the whole Western intellectual tradition about life after death, and it is the foundation point of the Christian theology of life after death, because that's why the early church fathers, they incorporated it. Yeah.
Okay. Question number 5. So you have traveled a lot in your life. What's one travel hack, meaning something you do or something you take with you when you travel to make your travel less painful or more enjoyable?
I must say that I'm such a homebody that travel is just always such a stress. I've missed my family the whole time. I just really can't think of anything. I just have to grin and bear it. I don't like traveling.
Yeah, I'm with you there. And the older I get, the less I like it. Okay. Question number 6. What's one thing you've started or stopped doing in order to live or age well?
What comes to my mind is that I stopped eating meat in my early 40s. And I regret to say it was not on principle of harm to the animals. It was just that I began to lose my appetite for meat and to begin to appreciate more. It's like I noticed that after I ate meat, the next day I would feel bad. So I just stopped eating meat mostly. But, once in a while, if I have every 6 months, I'll have a craving. Yeah, but not much.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. I have a feeling
I've never had any just effort of will needed about the exercise. I mean, I've just been an addict. I ran 10 to 14 miles every day in medical school.
Wow.
Walked from the track. But I mean, that's just the concept. I got to not run anymore. I got to walk.
Yeah.
But I don't do it out of virtuous addiction. It's just addiction, pure and simple.
Well, good for you for staying active. Okay. Question number 7. What's one thing you wish every American knew?
I wish every American knew the lives very well of people like Franklin and Jefferson and Adams and Monroe. I mean, those were just rather almost preternatural people in a way. And it's like Ben Franklin's life is, I guess, the most fascinating life of anybody I know. So I think that to know about where the founders of this country, what kind of beings they were, for want of a better term.
All right. Thank you for that. Question number 8. What's the most important or useful thing you've learned about making relationships work?
I am just not the person to say because I'm just so bad at it. I got to say, but the older you get, the more you lose interest in yourself. I'm just tired of Raymond Moody. And I say that to audiences. I see the young people with, he must be depressed, but the people like me, age, yeah. It's just ego equals pain. That's a simple formula. It's absolutely true. And I'm not saying that because I went up on the mountain and burned the incense and, laid down on the bed of nails. It's just that it's like I just damn near kill myself with ego. But, one ego trip is enough. That's what I've realized. I told that to a Swami, a Hindu Swami, a few years back. I said, one ego trip is enough. And he said, yeah, that's right. It is. Jealousy was mine. Well, they're all kind of like dreams. They're so real when you're in them.
Yeah.
Then once you're out of them, no, I don't want an ego trip anymore. So my strategy is to keep my self-esteem as low as possible.
All right. Question number 9. Aside from compound interest, what's the most important or useful thing you've learned about money?
Well, I learned it from my friend Milton Friedman. And this is what Milton said. He said, money can make you rich. He was, one evening, this lady called him from Harvard, and she explained that she was doing her doctoral dissertation in economics on monetary policy. And so she asked him if he would give her a quotation for her dissertation. And he said, yes. He said, money can make you rich. and she said, can I quote you on that? And she said, yeah. And I'm sure he informed her, but he was just a wonderful man. But, there's a lot of truth to it. Money can make you rich. That much I know.
Yeah, right on. All right. So question number 10 here in the lightning round is, if people want to connect with you, assuming you're okay with them doing so, or they just want to learn more from you, what would you have them do?
Well, there's several ways. I have a website, lifeafterlife.com. When my computer broke the other day and I took the crank off the side, I saw Thomas Edison's trademark in there. So I don't use the computer. But I am happy to give my home address for those who want to write personally. And happy to do this. This is 5881 Old Summerwood Boulevard, Sarasota, Florida, 34232. Raymond Moody, Old Summerwood Boulevard, Sarasota, Florida. And that zip code. And then I have a website, lifeafterlife.com.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. And one thing I want to let you know is that, as an expression of gratitude to you for sharing so generously of your time and your experience and your wisdom today, I have made a microloan to an entrepreneur, a woman, in Indonesia. Her name is Rosita. She's 43 years old. She's married. She has a daughter. She runs a business selling food. And so this loan, I won't make any interest on it, but the person who facilitated it in Indonesia will. And hopefully it will be part of a virtuous cycle and doing some good in the world. So thank you for giving me a reason to make that microloan.
Thank you so much, Brilliant. It's just so sweet of you. Thank you.
That's my pleasure. Well, the very last part of the interview here is, as I said, I just have two questions about writing. And the first question is maybe kind of a broad question, so feel free to answer it in any way you want. But it's, would you be willing? So now you've written many, many books, more than a dozen, as I understand. Right. And so my question for you is, would you describe for me and people listening, what's your process? How do you do it? How do you go about actually completing a book?
Well, I can describe my process, and I can also give you a statement by the Paracelsus, the founder of iatrochemistry.
Okay.
And about that. And he said, and I'm sorry about the old language and the gender thing, but what he said was, a man who desires to write a book first creates a sort of heaven in his mind, from which the work he desires flows into him. And that's apropos. I'm sure a lot of people will respond to that, because that's how I've used that over the years. And a lot of people say, right on. And I see the point in it too. And maybe that's not exactly the way I would put it, but this is how I would put it. It's that, number one, the creative process is just the greatest thrill there is. It's just like that flow of creativity. It's just the height of it. Once you get into that flow, wow, right? And then you can really appreciate the Greek views of the muses, right? Because it doesn't seem to come from you or from here even.
Yeah. So that's great. Thank you for sharing that. So the last I realized I said I had two questions about writing, but I do have two final questions. So one is just, if there's anything, I know in this almost 2-hour conversation, we've covered a lot of ground, but I wonder, so I'll just tell you the two last questions now, and you can address them in any order. Is there anything that we haven't talked about that you want to talk about that you think would be of service to people listening? That's one question. The last one is, what advice or encouragement would you leave anybody listening with to help them complete their own creative endeavor? So those two things, kind of a final thought and encouragement, those two things. When
I am working on topic A, right, I've usually read quite a bit on topic A. But when I start writing and then the launching into the gradual writing project on topic A, I don't read on topic A. I read on peripheral topics. And I developed years ago a process, and I stick almost invariably to it. Maybe once in a great while I relapse, but I'm finally into it, where I ask God to guide me in my reading. See, I'm just like, and it's funny how things just pop up. And then, for example, I'm writing now on just different views of the afterlife around the world, and the different cultural views, which I don't know much about. And so I just saw an advertisement at the University of Chicago for this book entitled Gloves. Well, I'm interested in everything. Gloves, that's something I've read about. I've never thought about or read about. So I got this book on gloves, and oh my God, in addition to all these other things, like the image of a lost glove, once you got the image of the gloves, and then you're always going to be seeing lost gloves everywhere you look. Right?
Yeah.
Right.
And
And then you see the crazes and gloves or not gloves through the centuries and all right. And all of these fascinating things in themselves. And then I read that this tribe in Alaska of Inuit, I guess, had a dance which took you over to the other side. And it was through gloves. They had these magnificent gloves made, and the clickers on them were made of the beaks of birds that when the shamans would shake them in a certain way, they'd create this apparently unearthly noise or sound which would just sweep them away into the afterlife, which is like a shamanic procedure, right? So see what I mean is that I read all around the topic, and then it's like then you see, it makes the writing process so much richer.
Yeah.
To just have all this information, which may not, how could that be connected? But all of a sudden it is.
Wow. Amazing. Well, Raymond, I have really enjoyed this conversation. I enjoyed reading the books I mentioned, Paranormal and God is Bigger Than You Think. God is Bigger Than the Bible, right? Final thought, final encouragement. What do you leave listeners with that might help them either get started on a creative project they've been ideating on for a long time, or maybe that they're in the middle of and for whatever reason haven't brought it to completion just yet?
Prayer is, it's like and the prayer of surrender. It's not God, get me started and doing step 1, 2, but just like to turn it over. It's, I just made that discovery myself, and I was wrestling with this problem, and I just obsessed with what's going on. And I just turned it over to God. God, you fixed it. And then it all just sort of happened. It just went away. And so I was telling George Ritchie that. And he said, the most powerful prayer is surrender.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it doesn't seem any more, it seems logical to me that one might pray to God for a word if one believes that God is the creator of everything. Why wouldn't God be willing to?
Yeah, and it's also kind of a companion.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just a continuation of that initial work.
Yeah, friendship. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Raymond, thank you so much. I'm just repeating that I've really enjoyed this. I look forward to the time our paths cross again next. I don't know when it will be, but I feel confident it will happen. And if you find yourself in Salt Lake, please do let me know. If it works for your schedule, I'd love to connect with you in person.
Same here. And thanks. Love to everybody listening to this, folks. And thank you so much. And hope you've gotten something out of it.
Hey, thanks so much for listening to this episode of the School for Good Living podcast. Before you take off, I just want to extend an invitation to you. Despite living in an age where we have more comforts and conveniences than ever before, life still isn't working for many people. Whether it's here in the developed world where we deal with depression, anxiety, loneliness, addiction, divorce, unfulfilling jobs or relationships that don't work, or in the developing world where so many people still don't have access to basic things like clean water or sanitation or healthcare or education, or they live in conflict zones, there are a lot of people on this planet that life isn't working very well for. If you're one of those people, or even if your life is working, but you have the sense that it could work better, consider signing up for the School for Good Living's transformational coaching program. It's something I've designed to help you navigate the transitions that we all go through. Whether you've just graduated, or you've gone through a divorce, or you've gotten married, headed into retirement, starting a business, been married for a long time, whatever. No matter where you are in life, this 9-month program will give you the opportunity to go deep in every area of your life, to explore life's big questions, to create answers for yourself in a community of other growth-minded individuals. And it can help you get clarity and be accountable to realize more of your unrealized potential. It can also help you find and maintain motivation. In short, it's designed to help you live with greater health, happiness, and meaning so that you can be, do, have, and give more. Visit goodliving.com to learn more or to sign up today.